never imagined that my sister's wedding would be the moment that shattered me completely. Yet there I was, standing in the grand ballroom, surrounded by sparkling chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests, feeling like an intruder at a celebration, meant for someone else. Jessica had always been the golden child, the one who made our parents proud. Perfect grades, flawless looks, and now, a perfect wedding. Meanwhile, I stood at the edge of the room, clutching my champagne glass with trembling fingers, trying not to be noticed. The emerald green dress I wore clung to me uncomfortably, as if it too knew I didn't belong there. When Jessica's husband lifted his glass for a toast, everyone's attention turned to the beaming couple. I managed a weak smile, trying to blend into the background. Jessica's laughter rang out, warm and confident, as she leaned into the microphone, eyes bright with triumph. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," Jessica began, her voice syrupy sweet. "Especially my big sister Emma, for being such an inspiration. You know, watching her struggle with her little business ventures taught me the value of stability and hard work. Without her mistakes, I wouldn't have known exactly what not to do." A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd, and I felt every mocking chuckle pierce my skin. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I forced myself to stay rooted in place, not daring to move. My mother's polite smile didn't reach her eyes, and I saw my father glance away, embarrassed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The room blurred around me as Jessica's words sank in, twisting like a knife in my heart. She had always been good at making me feel small, but doing it in front of everyone, at her own wedding, was a cruelty I hadn't expected. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, Jessica's boss took the stage. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding authority, he greeted the guests with a smile. My stomach twisted when Jessica introduced him as her mentor and business partner. His eyes landed on me briefly, giving me a dismissive nod. He didn't know. Me didn't care to. To him, I was just Jessica's failure of a sister. My hands trembled as I set my glass down on a nearby table. I couldn't stand there any longer, couldn't face the pitiful glances or the murmured jokes. I slipped through the crowd, keeping my head down, and made my way to the restroom. Once inside, I locked myself in a stall, sinking down onto the closed toilet seat. My hands fumbled for my phone, desperate for a distraction, but my vision was too blurred with tears to see the screen. I bit down on my lip to keep from sobbing out loud, my chest heaving with suppressed cries. This wasn't the first time Jessica had humiliated me, but it was the first time it felt like everyone was in on the joke. I couldn't help but think back to all those nights when I stayed up, working on my business plans, pouring my soul into something I believed in. And now, it felt like all that effort had been reduced to a punchline. Through the dim light filtering, under the stall door, I stared at my hands, noticing how they still trembled. My mind raced, thoughts colliding in a chaotic mess of hurt and anger. I couldn't stop hearing Jessica's words, couldn't shake the bitterness rising in my throat. Slowly, I wiped away my tears, forcing myself to take deep, calming breaths. My reflection in the small metal panel on the stall door looked fragile and broken. But as I stared at myself, something fierce sparked within me, a determination I hadn't felt in years. I couldn't keep letting Jessica define me. I couldn't keep being the joke in my own story. If they wanted to laugh at my failures, fine. But I wasn't going to give them any more ammunition. This wasn't the end. It was just a new beginning. With a shaky but determined breath, I straightened my dress and fixed my makeup. I wasn't going to let them see me broken. Not anymore. I stepped out of the stall, catching sight of my own reflection in the ornate bathroom mirror. I fixed my hair, wiped away the last traces of my tears, and forced myself to stand tall. My heart still ached, but my resolve was stronger. As I walked out of the restroom and back into the ballroom, I could feel the curious stares and whispered conversations, but I ignored them. My mind was already working, formulating a plan. They didn't know it yet, but I was done being the family failure. I would rise, and one day, they would see me not as Jessica's shadow, but as someone who forged her own path. I whispered to myself as I walked past the revelry. This isn't the end. The drive home from Jessica's wedding felt like moving through a fog, thick and heavy, clouding everything in its path. The streets blurred past, and the faint glow of city lights danced along the rain-slicked pavement, casting fractured reflections in every puddle. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale against the leather. Jessica's voice echoed in my mind, replaying her mockery over and over like a broken record. Inspiration, she had called me, as if my life had been some cautionary tale. A roadmap of failures designed to guide her towards success. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, the engine still humming beneath me as I sat there in silence. The rain pattered against the windshield, tiny droplets racing each other down the glass. I watched them for a while, my mind drifting back to our childhood, back to when Jessica and I were just two sisters playing dress-up in our mother's silk scarves, pretending to be queens of our own little worlds. But even then, Jessica always won the games. She was always the queen, and I was always something less. I stepped out into the rain, the chill biting at my skin as I hurried up the stairs. My apartment greeted me with its familiar silence, the kind that had once felt like freedom, but now felt like loneliness. I flicked on the lights, the soft glow illuminating the cluttered space. Papers were strewn across my desk, blueprints of ideas and scribbled notes. A stack of business cards from networking events sat untouched, collecting dust. I slipped out of my heels, the relief immediate as I padded across the wooden floor to my desk. My laptop was still open, the screen dark until I tapped the spacebar. The screen flickered to life, displaying the half-finished project I had been working on for weeks, a startup idea that, in my mind, could revolutionize small business analytics. But to my family, it was just another one of Emma's little projects, another waste of time. I sank into the chair, letting my fingers graze over the keys, feeling the familiar hum of possibility. But the weight of Jessica's words pressed down on me, suffocating the hope I had clung to for so long. Growing up, it had always been Jessica who sparkled. Straight A's, class president, the first to get her driver's license, the first to go to college, the first to get married. At every turn, she was winning some invisible race, and I was stumbling along behind her, tripping over my own dreams. Our parents adored her. At every family dinner, my mother would beam with pride as she recounted Jessica's latest accomplishments, her new promotion, her stunning engagement ring, her flawless wedding plans. And then she'd turn to me, her smile faltering just slightly. "And how's that business thing going, Emma?" she'd ask, her voice laced with pity. "Fine," I'd always answer, forcing a smile, pretending the comment didn't slice me open. But it did. It always did. In my solitude, I built walls around my dreams, protecting them from the cynicism that surrounded me. I poured everything I had into my startup, sacrificing nights out, vacations, even relationships. Friends drifted away as I missed, birthdays and skipped weekend brunches. Lovers grew tired of my late nights and endless planning. It became my life. It became my identity. The laptop screen blinked, pulling me from my thoughts. I stared at the numbers, the projections, the plan I had spent months perfecting. It wasn't just an idea, it was my salvation. My chance to step out of Jessica's shadow and prove that I was more than their whispers and judgment. But the truth was, my business was struggling. Investors had pulled out, citing instability in the market. My savings were dwindling, and each passing day brought another bill I couldn't pay. I was fighting a losing battle, and every time I came up for air, I was dragged back under by the weight of my own ambition. Yet, I couldn't let go. I wouldn't. The wedding toast wasn't the first time Jessica had mocked me. It was just the most public. Growing up, she had always taken the opportunity to remind me of my shortcomings, her words laced with that perfect blend of sweetness and poison. She would smile as she did it, the same way she did at her wedding, and I would smile back, pretending it didn't hurt. But it did. It always did. I stared at the screen, the blue light casting shadows on my face. My fingers grazed the edge of the keyboard as I leaned back, closing my eyes. The memory of Jessica's voice, the laughter of the crowd, it burned in my chest, sparking a fire I hadn't felt before. I would show them. I would show Jessica, our parents, her condescending boss, all of them. I would rise from this, stronger, and more unyielding than they could ever imagine. I wouldn't just survive, I would succeed. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. My eyes opened, and I leaned forward, fingers flying over the keyboard as I mapped out my next steps. I wouldn't wait for permission or approval. I would build this from the ground up, brick by brick, until there was nothing left of the person they had mocked and doubted. I would redefine what success looked like. The room was silent except for the gentle tapping of my keyboard and the soft hum of rain against the window. I sat there for hours, my heart pounding with purpose, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for certain: I would. And when I did, they would watch. They would all watch. The days after Jessica's wedding drifted by in a haze. I woke up each morning with the same sick feeling in my stomach, the same dread that crept into my bones and settled there like a parasite. My apartment grew colder, emptier with each passing day. Little by little, pieces of my life disappeared, sold, off to keep the lights on, to pay for groceries, to scrape by another month. The leather couch I used to sink into after long nights of work was gone, replaced by a folding chair and a blanket I kept tucked away for the winter. My television, my coffee table, even the framed paintings I once bought at a flea market, all vanished in exchange for crumpled bills. The only things left untouched were my business plans, scattered across my desk like a shrine to my failures. I ran my fingers over the edges of the pages, worn and soft from constant handling. Each line, each diagram, had been painstakingly crafted, with hope. Hope that one day, someone would see what I saw, that someone would believe in me. But no one ever did. Jessica's words haunted me in every empty room, every echo that bounced back off the bare walls. Her laughter at the wedding toast, the mockery disguised as grace. It lingered like a bruise that refused to fade. I threw myself into work, clawing at the scraps of opportunity I could find. Calls went unanswered. Emails sat in drafts, unsent, because I couldn't bring myself to read another, "Unfortunately, we've decided to go in another direction." It became a routine. Wake up, fight for scraps, fail, sleep, repeat. My final investor pulled out in late November. The call had come just as the first snow began to settle on my window pane, dusting the city in white. I stared at the email for a long time, the words blurring together. No explanation, just a curt withdrawal and a polite wish for my future. Endeavors. Future endeavors. The words tasted bitter. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. My parents still believed I was working on that little business idea, and I let them think it. What was the point of correcting them? Jessica's name popped up in nearly every conversation, her latest triumph slipping into casual dialogue like it was second nature. She had just signed a major deal with her boss, expanding his firm into a new territory. It was all over social media, her grinning face plastered on glossy posts with congratulatory comments flooding in. Meanwhile, I couldn't even afford a new winter coat. The final blow came at our family dinner the following week. I had been reluctant to go, but my mother insisted. "It'll be good for you, Emma," she'd said over the phone. "Get out of that apartment. See your family." Reluctantly, I agreed. I arrived at my parents' house just as the snow began to fall again, tiny flakes dusting my coat as I stepped onto the front porch. The warmth of the house enveloped me as I stepped inside, the smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread filling the air. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe it in, to remember a time when this place had felt like home. Jessica was already there, perched elegantly at the dining table with her husband, Mark, beside her. She wore a dress that shimmered in the light, her hair perfectly styled, her smile radiant. She looked up as I entered, and her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Triumph, maybe. "Emma." She greeted me, her voice dripping with sweetness. "It's so good to see you." I forced a smile, slipping out of my coat and hanging it on the rack. "You too." We ate in uncomfortable silence, the kind that presses in from all sides, suffocating any attempt at conversation. I focused on my plate, pushing the food around with my fork, barely tasting it. I wanted the night to end, to retreat back to my apartment where I could hide from their judgment. But of course, Jessica couldn't help herself. "Guess what, everyone?" she announced, her voice bright and loud. The room turned to her, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "I just closed that deal with Jonathan's firm. It's official. I'm leading the expansion next year." There was applause, genuine and proud. My mother clapped with enthusiasm, leaning over to hug Jessica tightly. My father raised his glass, offering a toast. "To Jessica," he said, warmly. "We're so proud of you." My stomach churned. I set my fork down, my appetite long gone. Jessica caught my eye from across the table, her smile widening just enough to show her teeth. "And how's that little business of yours going, Emma?" she asked, voice light and airy. "Still trying to sell those little gadgets?" Laughter followed. Laughter. My parents chuckled politely, and I watched as Mark hid his smile behind his wine glass. I felt the burn crawl up my throat, my cheeks flushing with heat. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold it together. "I'm still working on it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well," Jessica said, raising her own glass, "I'm sure it'll all work out eventually." Her smile was so sweet I could almost taste the venom beneath it. I couldn't stay. I excused myself from the table, barely hearing their goodbyes as I slipped out the back door. The cold air bit at my skin, and I stood there in the snow, the white flakes, melting on my cheeks. Or maybe those were tears. I couldn't tell. My car was frigid when I climbed inside, the engine coughing to life as I slammed the door shut. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The world outside blurred as I sat there, the weight of it all crushing down on me. That night, my apartment felt emptier than ever. I sat on the bare floor of my living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the ghosts of dreams I'd held onto for far too long. My business plans were scattered across the floor, pages creased and worn. My eyes fell to a photo frame that had been knocked over in the chaos, a picture of me at my college graduation. I was beaming, my cap crooked, my eyes full of promise. I reached out, fingers brushing over the glass. It felt like I was touching a stranger, someone I used to know but hadn't seen in years. My hands trembled as I set it back down, dust settling on its surface. I couldn't let it end like this. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. Not after everything I'd endured. With a deep breath, I crawled to my laptop, dragging it into my lap and flipping it open. The screen glowed in the darkness, and I typed out the email with fingers that no longer shook. It was a pitch to a global tech firm I had admired for years, a company I had dreamed of working with since I started my business. I read it over twice, my heart thudding in my chest. This was it. My last shot. My final stand. My finger hovered over the send button, breath catching in my throat. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer to whatever God might still be listening, and pressed send. The screen flashed, and it was done. And then, I waited. Leaving the city felt like shedding old skin. I still remember the way the skyline disappeared, behind me in the rearview mirror, swallowed up by distance and dust. My belongings fit neatly into the trunk of my rusted sedan, an irony that wasn't lost on me. Years of struggling, clawing for success, and it all boiled down to a couple of suitcases, a box of business files, and a single potted plant I refused to leave behind. The town I chose was small, nestled between hills and rivers, far enough from my family to breathe again. The streets were lined with oak trees whose branches hung low like the outstretched arms of old friends, welcoming me with a quiet kind of grace. I found a studio apartment above a bakery, its windows smudged with flour and its air thick with the scent of fresh bread. It was tiny, with walls painted a faded cream and wooden floors that creaked beneath my feet. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I slept without the weight of their whispers pressing on my chest. The silence was different here, softer, almost gentle. I woke up each morning to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of coffee drifting up from the bakery below. I would sit by the single window in my apartment, legs curled beneath me, watching the sun spill over the rooftops, stretching shadows across the cobblestones. My days were simple. I took on freelance work, small coding projects, tech consultations, whatever paid. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I kept my expenses low, eating simple meals and walking wherever I needed to go. I cut out the noise, the expectations, and for the first time, I felt something close to peace. It was during one of those quiet mornings, with sunlight pooling at my feet, that I decided to try again. My laptop, old and scratched, hummed to life as I opened it, the glow of the screen casting shadows on my walls. I logged into online communities, forums for female entrepreneurs, tech groups, small business networks. I introduced myself, cautiously. At first, sharing my ideas, offering help where I could, and to my surprise, people listened. My first contract came from a woman named Grace, a small business owner in Vermont who needed help setting up her website. She paid me up front, a modest sum that felt monumental in my hands. It was the first brick in what would become my new foundation. More work followed. A software update for a local bookstore, a networking overhaul for a cafe chain. Small projects, but each one breathed life back into me. I rebuilt my skills, sharpening them with each line of code, each contract signed. I connected with other women in tech, swapping stories and strategies late into the night. We were strangers, scattered across the world, but bound by the same thread of ambition and resilience. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. My little studio apartment began to fill with life. New business files stacked neatly on my desk, a whiteboard on the wall covered in scribbled ideas, Post-it notes clinging to its surface like petals of promise. My potted plant thrived on the windowsill, its leaves stretching toward the sunlight with quiet determination. Each small success chipped away at the shadow of Jessica's mockery. With every project completed, every payment received, I felt a part of me heal. The scars left by her laughter, by my family's judgment, grew fainter. I found pieces of myself that I had long forgotten. The parts that were brave, capable, and unyielding. I moved through my days with purpose. Mornings were spent in meetings, afternoons coding away in silence, and evenings reconnecting with communities that embraced my ambition instead of smothering it. I joined networking events online, connected with women-owned startups, and built bridges that I had once thought were impossible. And then, on a brisk autumn morning when the leaves outside my window had turned to amber and gold, I received an email. I was sitting at my desk, fingers tapping out the final lines of code for a project I'd been working on, when the notification flashed across my screen. I almost didn't open it. My heart fluttered in my chest, a familiar pang of dread bubbling up from beneath the surface. But something in me refused to look away. I clicked it, holding my breath. Business proposal. Meeting request. My eyes scanned the text once, twice, 3 times before the words began to sink in. It was from the global tech firm I had pitched to months ago, the one I had almost forgotten in the blur of survival. They wanted to meet. They wanted to discuss my idea. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, unblinking. The walls of my tiny studio seemed to pulse with possibility, stretching out beyond the plaster and wood into something I couldn't quite touch but could almost taste. A shiver ran through me, sharp and electric. My hands trembled as I reached out, tracing the edges of the laptop screen as if it might disappear at any moment. But it didn't. It stayed. They wanted to meet. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, the weight of everything crashing over me, in waves. All the failures, the sacrifices, the long, lonely nights spent wondering if I was worth anything at all. They all gathered around me, whispering like ghosts. But this time I didn't flinch, because I was still here. I had survived. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of my own ruin, brick by brick, and I wasn't done yet. I opened my eyes, staring out the window at the quiet street below. People walked by, bundled up against the cold, their footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. Life moved on, as it always did. But this time, I wasn't watching from the sidelines. I was ready. I reached for my laptop, fingers moving with new confidence as I typed out my reply. I would love to meet. When I hit send, I didn't hesitate. I didn't falter. I simply watched, as the message disappeared from my outbox, my reflection in the screen staring back at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, letting it seep into the cracks of my soul. This was just the beginning. I leaned back, fingers laced behind my head, and for the first time in years, I smiled. The city skyline gleamed with possibility as I stepped out of the elevator and into the expansive lobby of Synertech Industries. The glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting the sunlight in prismatic bursts across the marble floors. My heels clicked with steady confidence as I crossed the threshold, the sound crisp and sharp against the hush of the morning. A receptionist with perfectly styled hair and a smile that could sell dreams greeted me, her eyes bright with professional politeness. "Ms. Emerson?" she asked, glancing down at her screen before meeting my gaze again. "That's me," I replied, my voice steady. "They're ready for you," she said, gesturing towards a set of double doors flanked by frosted glass. "Good luck." I nodded, adjusting the strap of my leather bag, and walked forward. My heart thudded in my chest, a rhythm of hope and fear entwined. This was it, the meeting I had clung to since that desperate night months ago. It was surreal, almost dreamlike, to be standing there, on the precipice of something I had only ever imagined in the quiet corners of my mind. The doors opened smoothly, revealing a sprawling boardroom filled with suits and stern faces. I recognized some of them. Executives I had only read about in magazines, CEOs of companies that dominated the tech world. They looked up as I entered, their eyes calculating, assessing. Ms. Emerson. A man at the head of the table stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze unyielding. "Welcome. We've been eager to hear more about your proposal." I smiled, shaking his hand with a confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. "Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity." I settled into the chair they had reserved for me, placing my bag gently on the floor beside me. My laptop hummed softly as I opened it, the screen illuminating the faces around the table. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and began. My voice was clear, unwavering, as I outlined my vision, how small businesses could leverage analytics to compete with corporate giants, how real-time data could transform decision-making for entrepreneurs. I spoke with the passion I had always carried, unfiltered and unapologetic. The room remained silent as I presented, their eyes fixed on me, absorbing every detail. It wasn't until I finished that the questions came. Sharp, probing, relentless. I met each one head-on, unflinching, my answers crisp and precise. I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. I knew my vision better than anyone. I had lived it, breathed it, sacrificed for it. When the final question was answered, there was a pause, long and weighted. The executives exchanged glances, silent nods passing between them. Finally, the man at the head of the table leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Ms. Emerson," he began, his voice firm but laced with respect, "we would like to move forward." I blinked, the words settling slowly, like dust on a still surface. "Excuse me?" He smiled then, genuine and warm. "We believe in your vision. Sinertech would like to partner with you to bring this project to life." My breath caught, my hands clutching the edge of the table to ground myself. This was it. My fingers tingled with adrenaline as I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. I'd be honored. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and just like that, my life began to change. The rebranding was swift and sharp. Sinertech's resources flowed into my project, and within months, I had a new office, new staff, and a team that believed in what we were building. My name began to appear in tech magazines, articles heralding the partnership as a groundbreaking move for female entrepreneurs. My face stared back at me from glossy pages, my smile poised, my eyes determined. I traveled, speaking at conferences, shaking hands with business leaders who once wouldn't have spared me a second glance. I stood, on stages beneath blazing lights, sharing my story with audiences who nodded along, some with tears in their eyes. Women approached me afterward, clutching my hand and whispering words of hope, how they too would keep fighting. The world began to see me as I had always wanted to be seen, not as Jessica's shadow, not as the family failure, but as Emma Emerson, the CEO of a thriving company, a force in the tech world. My apartment above the bakery was replaced with a loft in the heart of the city, its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline that once felt so distant. I decorated it with things that mattered, paintings from local artists, bookshelves filled with stories of resilience, and photos of the women I had met along the way who inspired me to keep going. But I never let go of the tiny potted plant. It sat on the windowsill of my new office, stretching toward the light with the same quiet determination I had once clung to. The invitation came on an unassuming Thursday afternoon. It was a corporate event hosted by Sinertech to celebrate its latest expansion. I arrived dressed in tailored black, my heels clicking with the same rhythm of confidence I had carried into their boardroom months before. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, tables draped in white, linen, silverware polished to a mirror shine. I moved through the crowd with practiced grace, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. My name was recognized now, my reputation respected. And that's when I saw him. Jessica's boss, Jonathan. He was standing near the bar, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. His expression shifted, recognition flickering across his features. I approached, my step steady, my gaze unwavering. "Jonathan," I greeted him, extending my hand. For a moment, he just stared, his eyes flicking from my face to my hand before he shook it. His grip was firm, his smile polite. "Ms. Emerson," he said, his voice carrying none of the condescension it had at Jessica's wedding. "It's good to see you again." I smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I'm sure it is." He nodded, his gaze sharp but careful. I've been reading about your company. Impressive growth. I didn't realize, well, his words trailed off, unfinished and clumsy. I tilted my head slightly, my smile never faltering. Didn't realize I'd be more than just Jessica's sister? I asked, my tone light but cutting. His laugh was forced, awkward. I suppose not. He paused, glancing around before leaning in just slightly. I underestimated you. I met his eyes, unblinking. A lot of people did. Jonathan straightened, his posture shifting. Well, he began, extending his hand once more. I'm happy to have been proven wrong. Congratulations, Ms. Emerson. I took his hand, my grip firm, my eyes never leaving his. Thank you, I replied smoothly. But you can call me ma'am. His eyes flickered with surprise, but he recovered quickly, nodding with a tight smile. Of course, ma'am. I watched him walk away, his shoulders stiff with discomfort, and for the first time, I felt it. The woman I was always meant to be. The woman they had laughed at, dismissed, and ignored was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, and unyielding. I stepped away from the bar, my heels clicking with purpose. The ballroom stretched before me, glittering with light and possibility. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just part of the room. I owned it, and I wasn't done yet. The invitation had arrived in a gold-embossed envelope, its edges trimmed with delicate lace. I held it between my fingers, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. My niece's wedding, Jessica's daughter, Emily. The event was to be held at the same hall where Jessica's cruel toast had shattered me years ago. I stared at the invitation for a long time, running my fingers over the embossed script, feeling the ridges of each letter. Memories clawed their way back, the chandeliers glittering above me, the laughter rippling through the crowd, Jessica's voice dripping with venomous sweetness. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, centering myself. That was then. This was now. When the day finally came, I stood before the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with a confidence I had only dreamed of back then. My dress was deep sapphire blue, tailored to perfection, its silk fabric clinging to my frame in elegant lines. My hair was swept up, soft tendrils framing my face. I clasped a diamond bracelet around my wrist, a gift from the first deal I had, closed with Cinertech. I hadn't worn it until today. My heels clicked against the pavement as I stepped out of the car, the sound sharp and rhythmic, echoing through the marble entrance of the hall. It was exactly as I remembered. Glistening chandeliers, gold-accented columns, the scent of lilies and champagne mingling in the air. But this time, it felt different. I was different. Guests turned as I entered, their eyes lingering, whispers fluttering like moths to a flame. I met each gaze with a smile, nodding politely, watching as recognition flickered across their faces. I was no longer Emma, the shadow of Jessica's perfection. I was Emma Emerson, CEO of Emerson Analytics. My name had weight now, carved out, of perseverance and grit. I moved through the crowd with ease, greeting old family friends and familiar faces. Their words were warm, their smiles genuine, and I could sense the shift, how they watched me with a kind of respect that had once been reserved for Jessica. The first glimpse of her came when I reached the grand hall, the chandeliers casting fractured light across the polished floors. She was standing near the head table, her back to me, dressed in ivory lace, her hair still perfectly curled, though there were streaks of silver now that hadn't been there before. When she turned and saw me, the blood drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came. I walked toward her, heels tapping in perfect rhythm, and extended my hand. Jessica. I greeted her with a smile that was neither sharp nor sweet, Just steady." She hesitated for a moment before reaching out, her fingers grazing mine. "Emma," she breathed, her voice thin, stretched over disbelief. I didn't think you'd come." I held her gaze, unblinking. "Family is important," I replied simply. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. She glanced around, as if searching for someone to rescue her from the moment, but no one came. I released her hand gently and moved past her, leaving her standing by the head table, her fingers curling into the lace of her dress. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Emily looked radiant, her dress shimmering under the soft glow of the lights. I watched from the middle row, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the altar. Jessica sat at the front, her posture stiff, glancing back at me more times than she likely realized. Each time, I held her gaze, and each time, she looked away. When the ceremony ended, the reception began almost immediately. Music filled the hall, soft and graceful, and guests drifted toward the ballroom. I mingled effortlessly, exchanging pleasantries, accepting compliments with practiced ease. I had become someone new, someone who no longer shrank under the weight of judgment. And then he arrived, Jonathan, the man who had nodded dismissively at me during Jessica's wedding, who had barely acknowledged my existence. He entered with his typical confidence, shaking hands, patting shoulders, his laughter loud and bold, but when his eyes found me across the room, his expression changed. I saw the flash of recognition, the moment he placed me, not as Jessica's struggling sister, but as the woman whose company had just been featured on the cover of Tech Innovators magazine. His jaw tightened, and he made his way over, his stride measured. "Ms. Emerson," he greeted me, extending his hand. His grip was firmer this time, his eyes steady. "It's good to see you again," I took his hand, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Jonathan," I replied with a smile. "I'm glad you could make it." His eyes flickered, a ripple of unease flashing across his features. "Congratulations on your recent success," he said, his voice clipped. "I read about your expansion. Impressive work." I nodded, still holding his hand. "Thank you. It's been a journey." I released his grip and let my hand fall back to my side. "I believe the last time we met was at Jessica's wedding. How long ago was that now?" Jonathan's smile faltered, and he cleared his throat. "A few years," he said, glancing around as if searching for an escape. I stepped closer, dropping my voice just enough. "Funny, I remember you nodding at me like I was invisible," I said, my smile never faltering. "I suppose things change." His eyes darkened, but he forced a smile. "Indeed, they do." I let the silence hang between us before nodding politely. "Well, enjoy the evening, Jonathan," I said, stepping back gracefully. His hand remained outstretched for a moment before he dropped it, nodding curtly before turning away. I watched him go, the same sense of triumph filling me as it had in that boardroom. It was only when I turned back to the crowd that I saw the toastmaster approaching. He was older now, but his eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm. "Ms. Emerson," he greeted me with a smile. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to say a few words?" The room hushed. Faces turned, eyes wide with curiosity. I glanced over at Jessica, who stood frozen by the head table, her eyes locked on mine. Her expression was tight, her hands clenched at her sides. I smiled softly, nodding. I'd be happy to. The microphone felt cool in my hand as I stepped onto the stage. I looked out at the crowd, faces familiar and foreign, all watching me with the same anticipation. I took a breath, steadying myself, and began. "Thank you for allowing me the honor to speak tonight, I started, my voice clear and calm. When I think back to the path that led me here, I remember the laughter, the whispers, the doubt. I remember those who told me my dreams were too big, too ambitious. I remember those who watched me struggle and waited for me to fail. My eyes found Jessica's, and for the first time in my life, she looked away. But I also remember the moments that mattered, the ones where I decided that the only approval I needed was my own. That my dreams weren't too big. They were simply too grand for the small minds that couldn't see them. A murmur rippled through the crowd, hushed but palpable. And now, I continued, my voice unwavering, I am here, not because I followed the path laid out for me, but because I built my own. The applause started slow, then swelled, filling the hall with thunderous approval. I stepped back from the microphone, nodding graciously, my heart steady and strong. When I left that hall, my heels clicking with the same rhythmic grace, I felt the weight of the past fall away with each step. The air outside was crisp and clean, and I breathed it in, filling my lungs with the taste of freedom. I had done it. I had become everything they said I couldn't be, and I had done it on my own terms.